Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to get this housekeeping out of the way, so I'm going to read the PPS disclaimer. PPS is a 501c3 nonprofit donation-based organization. We are dedicated to building community and providing educational events, support groups, and developing research projects related to the safe, conscious, responsible use of psychedelic medicines. The opinions and information provided by participants at our events are not to be taken as medical advice and does not reflect the standing of PPS. When considering the use of these medicines, please be responsible for your own research and decisions in doing so. We encourage developing connections with like-minded people. However, this is not a place to source illegal substances or make contacts for sourcing. We have three people that I am so grateful and delighted to have on the call today. Sam Chapman from Measure 109, Jesse Gould from Heroic Hearts, and Jenny Hansen from Heroic Hearts Project. She runs the ambassador program. We're going to be hearing from all three people. And we're going to start out with Sam Chapman today. Sam is the campaign manager for the Yes on IP34 campaign, aka Psilocybin Services Initiative, now Measure 109, Sam?
Correct.
A Oregon Ballot initiative campaign seeking to create the first ever statewide regulated psilocybin therapy program in the US. Pretty exciting. Sam has over a decade of experience in advocating for progressive drug policy reforms at the local, state, and national level. His previous experience includes consulting for statewide political campaigns, assisting local governments in writing rules and regulations. In 2013, Sam co-authored House Bill 3460, the Oregon law that legalized medical marijuana dispensaries. Sam has been a resident of Oregon for 20 years. He holds a degree from the University of Oregon in philosophy and political science, and I'm really grateful he agreed to speak to us today because he's incredibly busy. Sam Chapman.
Hi, thanks, Donna, and thanks, everyone. Again, Sam Chapman here with Measure 109, and really grateful to be here. I'm essentially going to just do a brief overview of the measure itself and then really hand it over to Jesse and Jenny to talk more about what is going to be, I think, the primary focus here, which is all of the amazing work that they're doing with veterans in need. I think the big overlap that we have here is the program that we're creating in Oregon stands to serve a lot of veterans in need as well, and also stands to potentially and hopefully set the standard for other states to follow to continue to create regulated and licensed access to psilocybin therapy in a way that ensures that the protocols are implemented and training and certification is required, but also really starts to open up new doors for folks who do not have access to things that are helping them treat anxiety, depression, addiction, et cetera. And of course, our veteran population is certainly suffering quite a lot these days, as they have been for some time. So without further ado, let me share my screen here. Alrighty, just diving right in here. So as I'm sure many of you may be aware, here in America, we have a mental health crisis. And unfortunately in Oregon, that crisis is even more acute. According to Mental Health America, Oregon actually has the most severe mental health crisis in the country. And that was prior to COVID. So obviously that's been compounded even more so, especially for different populations such as veterans, people suffering from end-of-life anxiety, and of course, BIPOC communities as well. For those who may not know, psilocybin is the active component found in mushrooms, over hundreds of different species of mushrooms around the world. And as of recently, psilocybin has actually been shown to have real promise for potentially being able to help people that are struggling with depression, anxiety, and addiction. Numerous studies have been coming out of research institutions such as Johns Hopkins, UCLA, NYU, all really highlighting the continued promise around psilocybin therapy. And in fact, it's shown so much promise that the FDA has recently given psilocybin therapy a breakthrough therapy designation, for both major depressive disorder and treatment-resistant depression. So we are certainly excited about the momentum that has been created and continues to move forward within the science and research community. So diving into the measure, the primary goal here is to create a licensing and regulatory framework to serve those who seek psilocybin therapy and can safely benefit from it, whether or not they have been diagnosed with a mental illness. So that is one of the major differences between the model that we're creating here in Oregon and the model that exists today at the federal level within the clinical research. Let me be very clear, we're incredibly supportive of the clinical research and really believe that we wouldn't be here today without it. And we just believe it's time just to create a model that allows anyone who could potentially benefit from psilocybin therapy to have access to it. So a couple of quick bullet points. Again, this measure will establish a regulatory framework within the Oregon Health Authority that will allow trained practitioners to administer psilocybin services at specially licensed centers. There will be an Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board that will be appointed by the governor that will work over a 2-year time period to compile research, draft potential policies and regulations, and do the implementation period. So again, there'll be 2 years of rulemaking before any licenses are actually issued. The reason for a 2-year rulemaking period is really we want to make sure that we get this right. We know that other states are watching us closely. We know that other states will be pushing legislation in years to come. And we want to make sure that we can create the best program we can and really get our right foot out for it. And of course, here's a slide on to your rule development period, which I'm going to keep moving on. So just as important, it's important to acknowledge what our measure does not do. Our measure does not allow for retail sales of psilocybin, nor does it allow for off-site consumption or possession. There'll be no branding or advertising of psilocybin products or any unregulated or untracked psilocybin products at all. So those are some of the things that we like to help people understand. It's not that we're not supportive of other models, and we do believe that this goes hand in hand with a lot of the decriminalization efforts. There are no conflicts between our medicalized therapeutic model and decriminalization efforts. They do go hand in hand. I think they work well together if they were to both pass here in Oregon. But it is important that people understand that, you know, this isn't cannabis legalization. This is different. It's really focusing on a therapeutic model. And so we know, based on a lot of our polling, that's incredibly important to make sure that people understand those differences. So here's the 3-step psilocybin services modality that will exist within our model. The first being a preparation session where a patient or client will sit down with a licensed facilitator to really conduct a mental and physical health assessment to ensure that they're not contraindicated and really ensure that they understand you know, what exactly it is that they're getting into, and making sure that they're really prepared and have an established relationship with their facilitator as well, prior to what is the second step, which is the psilocybin therapy session itself, which again must occur at a licensed service center, and the facilitator must be present throughout the entire process. And last, but certainly not least, is the integration session, which must be offered by facilitator after the completion of the psilocybin session. So diving into the campaign here, again, our polling tells us that we've got a real shot at winning this. Luckily, right now, we do not have any well-organized, well-funded opposition. With that being said, educating 1.1 million Oregon voters to the point to where they say yes is easier said than done. So we certainly have our homework cut out for us, but we do know that when we are able to reach those voters with a basic amount of information, essentially the answers to these 5 questions, when we're able to explain to people what psilocybin is, what the research says, what our measure does and does not do, and who stands to benefit from having access to psilocybin therapy, upwards of 55% of Oregonians are with us. So we know that we can get this done. We simply have to ensure that we continue to organize from a grassroots level to educate. You know, a lot of the demographics in every category, from Democrat to Independent to registered Republicans, they all swing yes when they are given a certain amount of information. So I really want to continue to press upon the fact that this is not a partisan issue. Suffering is not partisan. Depression, anxiety, addiction, those are not partisan issues. Those are health issues that everyone struggles with, and we all know someone who is struggling. And so again, we're excited to have this opportunity to allow Oregonians to decide whether or not they want to provide new options for people who are suffering where others have fallen short. This is a 2-minute animation video actually that we just released that does a really good job of highlighting a good portion of what I just said here, but I just want to share this with you very briefly.
Almost all of us in Oregon have a friend or neighbor who struggles with mental health challenges. These are everyday problems, even before the pandemic and recession: depression, anxiety, addiction. Too many Oregonians have spent years moving from medication to medication and doctor to doctor with little relief for feelings of severe depression or anxiety. We need other options. Those other options may soon be available. There's new research being conducted on therapy using psilocybin, a plant medicine. It's being studied for mental health benefits now at New York University, Johns Hopkins University, UCLA. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration found that it's a, quote, breakthrough therapy, giving a green light to path-breaking research. Psilocybin therapy would be regulated, permitted only in licensed offices, and not legalized for recreational use. There would be a controlled framework with strict safeguards in place. It takes place with a licensed and trained facilitator after a thorough evaluation and screening process. In a preparation session in the days before, you discuss the details of the day and what to expect from the session itself. On the day of the treatment, the client takes the psilocybin and experiences the effects, always with guidance and supervision. After the session ends, in an integration session in the days after, the client returns to discuss the experience, interpret what happened, and how to put it to good use in the future. Pioneering research studies show psilocybin therapy may help people break troublesome mental patterns and find new ways to cope with past traumas and difficulties. And it helps them do so without resorting to high daily doses of pharmaceuticals with all kinds of side effects. People are living happier lives. It's a new approach, worth considering.
Alrighty, so moving on to what it takes to win here. So these are our basic strategies in order to get this done in November. Again, education is everything. Building a strong coalition with political endorsements from organizations and individuals is incredibly important. Continuing to utilize the research, the scientists and the experts to persuade movable voters. We know that when we're able to really combine the science and the facts with the emotional stories of how people have benefited or stand to benefit from accessing psilocybin therapy, which Jesse and Jenny will both talk about specifically shortly here, we know that it moves a lot of folks. And so that plus continuing to rewrite the playbook on how to win campaigns in the middle of pandemics is unfortunately still a very important part of this process. So we're continuing to figure out how to do those things. These are just some of the numbers really quickly on how many votes we expect to be cast this November, and we need 50% plus one. So we know that currently we have about 887,000 yes votes. That means we need to persuade just under 250,000 Oregonians to vote yes. So we've got our work cut out for us again. And here's that slide actually that talks about the different parties and how we get gains in each single one based on those education points. So last but not least, here's a couple of our endorsements. This is one of our spokespeople who is actually becoming, his story has been shared a lot over the last couple of weeks. And so I'm just gonna play this last video and then wrap up here and hand it over to Jesse.
I was a Navy SEAL, 18 years, 12 combat deployments. I took a medical retirement. I suffered depression, anxiety, trauma, injuries on the inside. I couldn't live life outside. Dark thoughts. I tried talk therapy. Doctors threw pills at me. Nothing worked. Psilocybin therapy? I don't have the words. It breaks patterns of negative thoughts. You gain this awareness about yourself and it sticks. Yes on 109 means a new life without suffering.
So this is Chad Kusky, again, an 18-year Navy SEAL, 12 combat deployments based here in Portland. We have a little bit of his backstory in that quick 30-second TV ad that may very well be going up in a couple of weeks here. But Chad, unfortunately, is not alone in the amount of things that he's suffered as a result of combat, especially within the Navy SEALs. And so he's been a pretty amazing local spokesperson, and we're really lucky to have him share his story with other Oregonians as well. And really quickly, we've continued to pick up steam with other political endorsements so far. You'll notice a couple of familiar ones here: Hero Cards Project, as well as Veterans of War. Several other organizations starting to sign on. We have over 150 licensed healthcare professionals that have now endorsed the measure as well. We know it's incredibly important, especially during these times right now, to really put healthcare folks out front, along with veterans and other folks that really hit home, and really helping people understand that even if this isn't for them, they probably know someone that would stand to benefit. So really important that we continue to work with therapists, counselors, nurses, social workers, veterans, law enforcement, and other notable individuals to continue to educate Oregon voters so we can create the first psilocybin therapy program in the country this November here in Oregon. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop and hand it back over to you, Donna.
Sam, thank you so much. This is so important. Okay, I'm going to introduce Jesse Gould yet. That was a great presentation. Jesse Gould is founder and president of Heroic Hearts Project, a 501c3 nonprofit pioneering psychedelic therapies for military veterans. His job history includes working as financial analyst, advisor on practical business paths for a nonprofit, and a U.S. Army Ranger section leader, sergeant for over 4 years with 3 deployments in Afghanistan. In 2017, he founded Heroic Hearts to spearhead the acceptance and the use of ayahuasca therapy, which has now expanded to include other compounds like MDMA, ketamine, and psilocybin, which would be available with the passing of Measure 109, which means so much because veterans could come here and get help in the United States, and it'll just serve as a model across the country. Jesse helps shape treatment programs and spreads awareness of plant medicine as a therapeutic method, driven by a mission to help military veterans struggling with mental trauma. I first heard Jesse speak on Psychedelics Today, where he talked about his own journey with PTSD and the healing he received from using ayahuasca. Welcome, Jesse.
Thanks so much, Donna. Thanks for having us, and awesome job, Sam. Good to see you again.
Definitely. Thank you.
Would you, should I go into just sort of telling a little bit about my background, Donna? Would that work?
That would be great if you could share your story about how you first decided to take ayahuasca and when you started noticing symptoms of PTSD and what that looked like, and perhaps how the Veterans Administration diagnosed that, if they even did, and what that was like.
Yeah, definitely. I want to start off by reiterating an important point Sam made a couple times in his PowerPoint, and the beauty and the necessity of a lot of these modalities is not even if you personally are hurting, but I guarantee you know somebody out there that's struggling with some sort of mental issue. I guarantee you through some sort of connection, you probably are connected to some veterans that are struggling, sometimes a little bit quieter and sometimes louder. Sometimes it has all those connotations you see in TV and movies. But there are a lot of silent strugglers out there too. And what we've been seeing is that the current options, the current treatments that are available in the US, that we don't want to discount them, and they can still be very powerful for some people and necessary for certain mental illnesses, but they are just not doing the job. And so we just need more options. And fortunately, we're living in this time where in the Western perspective, we're rediscovering these options that have been used for thousands of years, oftentimes by indigenous communities and around the world. And so it's all about meshing these two understandings, these two knowledge bases together. So yeah, I'm Jesse Gould. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to talk with everybody. As Donna said, if you have any specific questions about Heroic Hearts Project or myself, feel free to put in the chat. And at the end, if we have time, we'll definitely try to get to it. Otherwise, you know, we will try to respond to questions post this if there's not enough time in the call, just through email. So check in on that. So my journey, I've had a very circuitous journey, or very roundabout journey, but part of it ended up with me enlisting in the military, and I became an Army Ranger, which is a special operations force in the Army, a direct action infantry unit, which included 3 deployments to Afghanistan. And I was a section leader, so in charge of 30 plus individuals of a mortar platoon. And so that was one aspect of it, is that as a mortar, which if you're not familiar, as a mortarman, it's a high angle trajectory rocket. And so when the rocket lifts off through the tube, there's this huge concussive force. And just being a ranger, you're always surrounded by concussive force. And I'll explain a little bit why that's important in a second. But I do also want to say that overall, I got a lot out of my military service. I would go back and do it all again. Just what I learned about myself in terms of the physical challenge and leadership, and this strong brotherhood that lasts today. And there's this dynamic of working for something greater than yourself, which I think is important for a lot of individuals. And so when I got out, I was ready to get out. I had a background in finance, and so I wanted to test my mettle in civilian world. I got a lot out of the military, and so now was sort of the next chapter in my life. And you know, at first it was good. I was going traveling and taking advantage of my freedom and some money I saved up to go see different parts of the world. I eventually settled in Tampa, Florida. And after a lot of resumes sent out there, I eventually found myself at a corporate finance job in this big international company in Tampa. And it was great. At first, it was perfect. You know, there's a lot of trajectory upwards. It was using my skills that I had, you know, was a little bit rusty on from my military service, but it was exactly where I thought I was going to be, and had a community, was surrounded by that. But because my life started slowing down, and had to adapt to this normal life, that's when a lot of these issues really started showing their head. And I ignored it as long as possible. I was still kind of in that ranger mentality of like, oh, nothing's going to stop me or slow me down. But it just kept getting worse. And I often call it sort of this dark cloud, because that's what it felt like, is this presence that I didn't want to admit was there, but that was becoming more and more a central focus in my life. And so for me, you know, fortunately on the outside, I was still very able to do all my job. And if you knew me at that time, you might not even notice that I had anything. But there's this really strong internal struggle, like what I was saying, with this sort of silent suffering that you wouldn't even know. And unfortunately, a lot of the veterans that end up committing suicide tend to be in that group. The people are completely surprised about it. I've had a number of individuals that I've deployed with that were in my life that were the same. Nobody would have suspected it, and that's a big tragedy. So anyway, extreme anxiety, going into depression. There's times I had to, you know, miss work because of, you know, anxiety attacks, and had to call in and say I had food poisoning or whatever. You know, depression would just leave me not wanting to leave bed through the weekends. And, you know, that would also lead to a lot of self-medicating with alcohol, to the point where, you know, I'd wake up some days of work having to take the hair of the dog beer just to function and be there, but still being high performer and being able to do it, which made it better, worse in some different cases. But it was all part of me not admitting, and all part of me just trying to figure out how to survive with whatever was going on with me. Because I had some knowledge of what it was, but I'm not an expert. I'm not a doctor. And so for me, it's just kind of like, I'm a ranger. Why am I struggling right now? And so eventually, fortunately, because of my intuition, there was this sort of red flag that started popping up of, you know, just one of those weekends of drinking too much and just feeling horrible the next day. And just like, what am I doing here? I'm repeating this cycle. And so I started really focusing on like, how can I turn this around? Like I'm out of shape. I'm not happy, you know, socially, relationship wise, nothing was really clicking together. So I started to turn around, joined a gym, really became dedicated to that, started learning cooking, try to really bring that social network together, really focus on the job, everything, all those side dynamics, meditation, journaling. And then at this point, eventually I also went to the VA, which I think I was dragging a little bit because it does have a pretty bad reputation on a lot of fronts. But it was like, hey, I was a veteran. If they're going to give me some free service in terms of therapy, then why not? Like, it won't hurt to talk to somebody. You know, I can get out of my own ego of maybe I need help of getting this. So I went there to the VA in Florida, waited in line, eventually got to see a social worker. And the social worker, no fault on them. I actually appreciate the candor. But I kind of explained exactly what I just explained to you. And she's kind of paused and hesitated. And I also told her that I wasn't myself personally interested at that moment on going on any medications, on any SSRIs or NRIs, just a personal decision. And she's like, you know, I wish I could help more, but unfortunately we are at capacity. And I can maybe get you to see a therapist like a couple times, but if you're not willing to go on this full protocol, we can't show progress. We can't show anything. And frankly, our doctors are just at capacity. There's some other options, but it doesn't seem to fit you. It tends to be more of, you know, more extreme cases. And then she just handed me a flyer that she's like, you know, this is generally what we can offer people outside of that. And it was, you know, a list of everything I'd been doing, you know, go run, go meditate. And so, you know, I appreciate her candor, and I know she wanted to help, and it was just the nature of the beast. It was the system. And so I walked out of there and I was frustrated. It was like, okay, well, either this is something I'm gonna have to live with the rest of my life, or I'm gonna have to figure this out. And it was kind of more of the former at first, of just kind of like, well, let's keep going. You know, I guess there's not help here, but fortunately there's something inside me that drove me and like continued, like, I got to figure this out. It came to a necessity. You know, things just kept getting worse, and stupid decisions, putting myself in unnecessary risk. And I heard about ayahuasca at that time. And I came from this background. I think I said, if you haven't checked it out, we were just featured in the New York Times. And I think this was one of the quotes in there of, I came from the DARE generation, just saying no drugs. And I definitely had that sort of perspective of, I kind of viewed like if I took drugs, then I'd also be in this different category of not necessarily bad, but like, you know, a different person, not like I guess not the integrity or not the virtues that I thought. And I was always teach their own, you know, no judgment real, but I just didn't see myself in my own personal narrative as that. So when I heard about ayahuasca, it was on a podcast, or, you know, it was growing in television and Netflix. And so I kind of was like, oh, that's interesting, but that's not me. Like, those people are just going to escape. Like, why can't you just do good old fashioned, you know, work it out kind of thing? But fortunately, the idea grew in my mind. And, you know, I was probably bored at work, is one of those jobs of, even if you're done at noon or 1 p.m., you still have to stay until the boss leaves. And so that started growing in frustration. My job just became less and less satisfactory. So, you know, during lunch, I probably just like boredly typed up ayahuasca. And, you know, I think it was part of me just like that knew, and was just trying to convince the rest of me to go. And because ayahuasca has, for people who don't know, but I'm assuming most people here, it stems from the Amazonian region. So, you know, across South America, Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, they all have their different traditions in an indigenous setting, each a little bit different, but kind of similar, using, you know, a brew made out of 2 plants at its core that causes a psychedelic experience that tends to be pretty intense. And for me, because it had this rich indigenous tradition going back thousands of years, this culture, this ceremony, I think that kind of allowed that little crack of like, okay, this is sort of an anthropological sort of expedition, just some stupid thing that we say to convince ourselves that it's okay and that we're allowed to do that. So it just got to that point. Like I said, I was at necessity. Red flags were in my head of my intuition. And I just knew at the very least, like, Tampa wasn't working for me. This job wasn't working for me. More days were unhappy than were happy. And so I took that leap of faith. Still went in, did research, found a place in Peru, Iquitos, Peru, and went in there skeptical, nervous, obviously. And fortunately, I went through with it. And it was a week long, 4 ceremonies over the course of the week. I don't want to go too much into my own personal experience. If you have questions about that, we can touch it later or down the line. I'm sure it's in some podcasts, but it was very tough for me. One, very physically demanding, but I think coming from that military perspective, I needed that to further respect it, so it gained my respect in that sort of way. But then through that, there were some understandings profound, especially self-reflections of like, yeah, you were kind of going down a pretty bad path. Like it's a good thing. But then also just really on a physical level, what I've said often, if you know about a computer, you can defrag a computer, which is you've been using it for a while, you've been deleting, saving, and the memory and the functioning process becomes inefficient because it's all this back and forth. And so defragging is a process that your computer goes through that essentially wipes everything clean and then puts it back on your hard drive in a much more efficient manner. And so in some way, it felt like that happened in my brain. It also felt lighter. It felt before like it just was like not functioning in an appropriate way, almost functioning against each other. Almost, I've said like warring states. And for the first time, it felt like one cohesive unit, and just the general sort of calmness and so, I was like, I don't want to take this for granted and maybe it'll go away, but there seems to be something here. And so after that, I traveled for a while. I was trying to figure out what was next in my life. But that idea just kept growing, and the noticeable effects stayed. And even I noticed things down the line that continue to show up, just in terms of calmness, in terms of not freaking out about what's next, and just allowing the challenge of life to unfold in front of me and enjoying that challenge, because that's the whole point of it. But then even on, again, what I attribute to more of a chemical change, things that used to spark severe social anxiety just no longer had that same effect. So I'd be in this crowded spot, this is pretty common with military veterans. They're in a crowded bar or what have you. And because of that, their training and being all the hypervigilance on alert, I'd have to take like a few shots just to be able to chill, calm down in that setting. And, even like 3 months after this experience, I was in that same sort of setting, and actually like a cafe or a bar that I had been to before, just hanging out. And I didn't have that. Like it no longer sparked that extreme social anxiety. And so for me, that's like phenomenal. Like that's above what I could explain, just like, casting away placebo. And so there's many other experiences through that journey. That was the inspiration of like, hey, veterans are going through a mental health crisis. Their suicide rate is, much higher than the general population. And there's just not a lot of options for them. And even if this could give some sort of hope, or even if it could just help 1 out of 1,000, 1 out of 1,000,000, then that's a life saved. And that's worthy of having that individual make that choice. It's all about choices. We come from that land of like opportunity choices. You should be able to decide, especially your life and your mental health and your fate into that level. And so that was sort of the inspiration of Heroic Hearts, of like, let's provide this information to a veteran community. And it evolved into, let's also connect them if they want to, as almost in sort of a harm reduction, but also a guided sort of way. And so that's kind of where we're at. I can go into a little bit more details about the program, but we're focused on veterans for now. But as Sam said, veterans tend to be a very powerful voice, because there's a lot of trauma out there, not just unique to veterans, but veterans can be that bridge to communities that would normally not talk about psychedelics. And so that's our goal, because we want more people to have options like what Sam's offering, but also preserve the tradition like it's been done for thousands of years in Peru. There's no reason that there should just be one option and this is the only way to do it. And so that's what we're trying to do in terms of preserving that, be respectful to the community, to sustainability, but also present this to veterans in a way they speak. It's almost like any other profession. You need to know sort of the language of veterans, and it helps to be one of them for that trust, for that overcoming that barrier.
Absolutely. And it's going to help all of us ultimately if this measure passes. And I know the OHA has to make some decisions on how that's going to happen. And that's going to take 2 years, right, Sam?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So that would mean that veterans could come here to get help in Oregon, which is huge, besides the general public could do it too. Sam, I mean, Jesse, now that more psychedelics are being introduced, like we've got psilocybin on the ballot, and ketamine, and you were talking about ketamine, psilocybin. I just saw a podcast you did. What other compounds do you use to help veterans right now, or can you?
Yeah, of course. And I mentioned this in the story, and because it was long-winded, I forgot. The reason why I mentioned that I was a mortarman and I was exposed to blast force is that's the other thing we're learning through the psychedelic process, is that a lot of these mental issues, mental traumas, are much more complex than just this umbrella term like PTSD or trauma. And because before it'd just be this quick, like, yeah, PTSD, here's an SSRI, here's some talk therapy, this is going to cut off the receptor, and so there you go. But psychedelics, especially psilocybin, especially ayahuasca, DMT, are working on such deeper, more complex layers. And it's really exposing not only the psychological side, but also the physical side of the brain. And so what they're showing is a lot of PTSD-like symptoms could actually be more of a physical combination with physical damage to your brain from concussive force, similar to what you're seeing in the NFL of the constant concussions, head trauma. And psilocybin, DMT, these are showing to actually heal the brain in a lot of ways, potentially neurogenesis, potentially increased plasticity. So that's the beauty of it, not only on this almost weird prolonged exposure therapy, but also in combination with possibly balancing out certain hormone levels, healing the brain. So Heroic Hearts, we start off, and that's at our core, ayahuasca. It tends to really work well with veterans. They really appeal to it. For a lot of journeys, there does seem to be this sort of warrior dynamic, you versus your own demons, being able to be empowered, but still have that hard experience where you take it in your own hands, and the insights are yours. The insights have a deeper power because you're the one that's almost in this like role-playing game, discovering them. And there's a lot of power to that as opposed to somebody else essentially telling you that. And my sort of view is that each of these psychedelics are unique. They're all powerful. They can all heal a whole variety of trauma. And we need to understand more and incorporate them more, because I think they're all going to have their own place. Everybody's built differently. Everybody's going to respond differently to whether it's psilocybin or DMT. Somebody might have a preference for this versus that. And, maybe the trauma will also respond differently to different psychedelics. And so it's all worth exploring, and they're all very powerful in their own way. So definitely interested in psilocybin. Sam and I will be, working to have a more permanent branch in Oregon, especially if this passes, and that there's this huge opportunity for us to help veterans find facilitators that they can trust, that can help out with some costs and all that, and build these communities again of other veterans that can, pay it forward and help them along. MDMA, we're on the sidelines right now, obviously waiting for the MAPS trials to get through, but hopefully, we're advocates, and hopefully if it does get through, trying to put more pressure on the VA to incorporate that, another powerful tool. In terms of ketamine's kind of the easier low-hanging fruit. There's pluses and minuses, but for people that have very severe depression and suicidal ideation, like in the immediate, a strong hallucinogen might not be the next best thing for them if they don't even have that baseline foundation. And so then something like ketamine might be that sort of immediate thing to stabilize them. There's been a lot of cases of people getting off other powerful medications and getting to this more stable platform through ketamine therapies. And then potentially, down the line, if they're in Oregon, then maybe psilocybin might be the next step down the line once they've integrated all this, once they've come to this healing. So there's all sorts of different options there. We're trying to explore it all. Our baseline mission is to heal veterans. And so if there is an option that is ethical and that the only thing that's stopping it is just old information that is completely outdated, then we're all about promoting it and exploring it.
Thank you, Jesse. And we were also wondering, Casey just asked a question, and I was wondering about this too, because from all the podcasts I've heard with you, you're very careful about vetting the facilities and the facilitators that you're sending vets to. And Casey asks, what is the process from point of contact treatment and follow-up integration for the participants?
That's a great question, Casey, because as many people who know and are familiar with this, is that integration, preparation are just as important in the whole process of having people heal. The psychedelics are essentially a tool. They're a very powerful tool, and they can be very helpful and help people get over those barriers, and they do a lot of heavy lifting, but it does take support and positive decisions for the person to go there. And as you mentioned, we're all about, we want quality. We want to make sure that if we send veterans, that we are doing better, we're not doing harm to them. We're setting them up in places I would feel comfortable, people on our team would feel comfortable. So, I or somebody on my team will go to these retreat centers, make sure we feel comfortable, ask all the questions, make sure that they have, safety protocols, how they do their ceremonies, their ayahuasca mix, or other psychedelic mix as well. We just had somebody in Jamaica checking out all sorts of psilocybin retreats down there. But then another important part is vetting the actual participants. Because like I mentioned, obviously there are contraindications with ayahuasca because it has a MAO inhibitor, but it's similar with psilocybin. If you're on certain medications, you want to be extra careful. If they have pre-existing conditions, heart conditions, mental health issues, you have to be aware of all these, and it might not be the best thing. If they're really in this unstable level, like I said, with some ketamine patients, then maybe ayahuasca is not the best thing. And so for us, we kind of want to, we're not medical professionals, but we also have to make sure that this is right for them from our perspective. And there's also certain personality types. We want to make sure that people have tried other therapies, or at least have tried to heal themselves, so that we know that they're going to put work into it from beginning to end, which is part of the integration. So a quick overview: somebody comes into us, heroicheartsproject.org, they fill out our application. We are a 501c3 as well. When we have the funds, we'll start arranging retreats. And so we'll send out a email to the veterans. These are it'll be on these dates. This is what's required. We want you to contribute this much if you are able to, blah, 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 blah. And then we get the feedback of the people on our waiting list. And then through there, then we start really going through, deep dive into the applicants. And like I said, follow all those. We also want to make sure there's good group cohesion, because that's important as well, making sure that the personalities sort of fit. When we find the applicants and I talk to them, generally somebody on our team, then we start the preparation pre-integration, which generally starts about 2 months prior. We have certified integration coaches through a company called Being True to You. And so the preparation, it's a lot of the logistics, flights, making sure paperwork's all there. But then it's the normal sort of pre-integration of like, let's talk about intentions, let's talk about expectations versus intentions, some of our own ways of talking to veterans that we think that will really help them prepare. Not building expectations, but just so when they go there, they have some sort of understanding of where their mind needs to be, breath work, some tips and tricks, so to speak. So that when they go there, they can hit the ground running. And then the retreat centers, we vetted them, they do their program. So we help them get there, often subsidizing costs through grants, our own grants to the veterans. And then that's when the follow-up work. So then the integration coach, we try to do one-on-one as much as possible, follow up with each of the veterans, in addition to doing group Zoom calls. And so that's why the group cohesion is important, because if the group really likes each other, then those Zoom calls tend to last much longer. And so we're there as long as they continue going to the group Zoom calls. And then, just in terms of the bigger alum, we'll do periodic Zoom calls as well, just to get people, just to be that resource. And as we expand, and Jenny can go into the ambassador program in a bit, that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to form these smaller communities in Oregon, in Las Vegas, to where it's more sustainably that they are supporting themselves. They can meet in person, build that, just to take away some of that isolation.
Yeah, and I understand, you know, you probably favor ayahuasca for certain individuals, but the cost would be cut considerably if Measure 109 did pass for you. So I was wondering, how often are you able to send vets to get help now?
During COVID, obviously it's been sort of an operational hold. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm actually doing like a pilot. I'm checking out a spot soon. But it's hard to say. It's really been based off of donations. You know, we try to do big offerings. The pre-COVID, we were doing like quarterly options for bigger retreats, and then throughout the year, groups of 2 or 3 going through it. 2020 was set to be a pretty big year. Even in March alone, we were set to send about, I think, like 60 to 70 veterans, but obviously all that came to a screeching halt. Options like Oregon, just again, it cuts down costs. It gives us more reliable options. We'll continue to do it in Latin America as well. And we're always trying to view places to cut down costs, but keep quality and keep sort of that respect and working with the locals there to make sure that we are all doing it right together.
Does anyone have any questions for Jesse before we move on to Jenny? I've got one more, Jesse. Do the vets contribute anything? It must be difficult for them, especially when they're in the state of PTSD, of trying to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the hard part of, unfortunately, mental trauma goes hand in hand with generally financial insecurity and insecurity in a lot of different ways. And that's why we have the grant program. It's sort of a sliding scale. We try to have at least everybody contribute something, some sort of skin in the game, just so it's their healing, they're owning it in some sense. And sometimes it just, you know, looks like a few $100s here. We try to get them to cover the flight or what have you. But then really push the pay it forward model. A lot of veterans afterwards, even if they weren't really able to contribute, you know, they'll continue to give us $50 here, $50 there afterwards. We've had a lot of veterans soon, actually, if you're going to be signing up for that integration coaching program so that they can further support other veterans in that sort of thing. You know, everybody has different means. And so that's what we're trying to do. And with Jenny, with the ambassador program, you know, money's hard all around, I think, especially now. And so, but there's a lot of people that want to contribute time or their own experience. Rudy, who's in the New York Times, has been very active within the Special Forces community. He's a Green Beret and just been, you know, talking to people one-on-one. And so our job is to empower that and, again, build those communities. And also just do, you know, work our butts off to try to get the financing to where we can support that and continue the vehicle moving as much as possible.
And then I've got one more question. What about veterans with traumatic brain injury? Does that cause swelling in the brain? And does psilocybin help with that, either microdosing or macrodosing?
It looks that way. Obviously, I don't believe to date there's any conclusive scientific evidence, just because of lack of ability to study it and not because of the lack of its power. But there is a lot of evidence that potentially psilocybin and DMT can cause anti-inflammatory effects on the brain. We're actually going to try to engage in a study. We're currently doing a study on the gut microbiome with ayahuasca, which would also relate to inflammation and hormone pathways. So yeah, I mean, it's something of interest, and we definitely, our hypothesis is yes. And so that's another avenue that we're trying to push this forward. And it seems that way on the large side. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence that people who've been doing microdosing as well as some other supplements, oftentimes non-psychoactive mushrooms, that's kind of become in vogue, and I've heard a lot of success stories. Obviously all anecdotal, but there does seem to be a lot of growing evidence that points to that.
Thank you very much, Jesse. If no one has any questions for Jesse, I'm going to move on to Jenny Hansen, who is What's your title exactly, Jenny? I know that you head the ambassador program. Do you have a formal title?
Ambassador Program Manager.
Okay. Well, Jenny is a mental health proponent and an empowering advocate for military veterans. She holds an interdisciplinary master's degree in mental health with focus on veterans and human services administration. She brings years of administration and management experience to the Heroic Hearts Project. Jenny fully understands and appreciates the benefits of holistic remedies after sustaining a traumatic brain injury and discovering that traditional pharmaceuticals were ineffective in treating her symptoms. She turned to natural treatments to help her heal. She holds a Master of Arts, field of study, mental health and human services administration, a Bachelor of Arts, field of study, political science. She is also licensed by the American Society of Safety Engineers and Strategies for Influencing Safe Behaviors, Successful Program Implementation, and Cultural Change. Welcome, Jenny. It's really been a pleasure getting to know you through this process of getting this meetup set up. So share whatever you, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, absolutely. And likewise, I'm so pleased that you decided to join our team. Thank you.
Yeah, so am I. Tell us what we can do and about the program.
So an ambassador is essentially a voice for the organization, an advocate in a sense, spreading the word, bringing people together, talking about the mission of Heroic Hearts. It can be as simple as just writing a post, mentioning what we do, and then a hashtag with Heroic Hearts. It can be helping with fundraising. We definitely need help with that all the time. Like Jesse said, we are really focusing now on forming these local communities. Portland would be awesome. I sense that there would be a really strong group there, because when we come together in a group, we can relate to one another, and I think we are stronger together, rather than just, I mean, Heroic Hearts is national, but we're all in different places. Jesse's on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, and the local hubs are really what we're focusing on right now. So we're trying to get these groups together. We're looking at doing crowdfunding campaigns. We're exploring that. What else? And we're also working on giving our ambassadors more tools to help spread our mission, which is connecting veterans to ayahuasca and other psychedelic therapy options. Hopefully to expand on the ayahuasca as Jesse discussed. So my job is, I'm an admin girl, and I'm just helping Jesse out and taking some of the pressure off of him, trying to get people on board, education through my posts, what we're about. I sometimes post about all kinds of research on various psychedelics, plant medicine, just trying to get rid of that stigma that I think is there for a lot of people, that they think, oh, it's a 60s hippie thing, and what use are these therapies? And that's obviously not the case. We know that they can be extremely beneficial for the right people when taken, consumed the right way with assistance. So that's pretty much a nutshell what this program is about. And thank you for posting the links, Donna, for the application. The application is pretty straightforward. We just want to know why you're interested in our mission, basic contact info, how you think you can best help us. It's not always just what we think is best, just what you can bring to the table. We do try to connect with mental health professionals and researchers as well. So oftentimes that's just word of mouth. Those professionals can't always post about what we do or psychedelics, but they can certainly communicate within their own network.
Yeah, how long has the ambassador program been up, Jenny? Because I've been to one meeting so far.
We just got started in January, and I believe that's when I joined Jesse. We were just getting things going. I mean, it was there, but not active. So it's been a learning process. I'm new to the nonprofit sector. I'm also new to psychedelic space. So Jesse and I together, and with outsiders who've been helping us. We're really trying to build this program. And we are going to have more regular meetings for our ambassadors. We're getting that going as well. So it's a work in process, but we're getting there.
Yeah, you had a really eclectic group of people in the last meeting. I was really impressed with the men and women that were on that call trying to help the cause.
Yeah, the more variety, the better, because everyone has their unique talents and they can be put to use in different ways. So we welcome all backgrounds, all people, whatever you think you can do to help, we welcome you.
Yeah, and like Jenny said, the application process is really simple. You fill application out online. Like I said, I heard Jesse on Psychedelics today, and it was such a great interview, and he was so passionate about this cause that I went through the ambassador program, and that's how they contacted me. And now there's a group of people that, like you said, are going to start meeting regularly to see what we can do to help the cause and push it forward.
Yes, and those group meetings are fantastic because it helps brainstorm even more ideas than what one person individually already has. So I think that's going to become a monthly thing, and Jesse and I still need to work out that date, what would be best, but we're working on that.
Cool. Is there anything that anyone would like to ask any three of our guests? And Jesse, is there anything you'd like to say that you didn't cover when you were talking? Anything you'd like to add?
Just sort of to sort of reiterate, if people have any questions and we weren't able to get to your questions here, the website is heroicheartsproject.org. And so you can either drop us an email. You have the ambassador application if you'd like to help out there, but then the veteran application if you want to be considered for this. I will say, obviously with COVID, times are hard on that. There's been a lot of delays just because a lot of it depends on travel and meeting of groups. Like there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It does seem to be starting to open up, hopefully, because we want to get back to helping as many as possible. But just be conscious of that, that there is a long waiting list. But we are doing everything in our effort to, help as many veterans that need our help. And hopefully if this passes in Oregon, then that will just give us a huge leg up to working with that community there, with the therapists, the community to really help as many veterans there. And it'll be a great model for other places as well.
Absolutely. Sam, what about you? Is there anything you'd like to add?
I don't think so. If anyone else has any additional questions or want to learn more about the measure, you can go to vote yes on 109.org. I just put the link in the chat as well. Yeah, if you're interested in getting involved in the campaign, there's a take action page as well on our website. You can get in touch with us that way. And just thanks again for the opportunity to continue to spread the word and let people know more about Measure 109 and the new opportunity we have for psilocybin therapy here in Oregon.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Sam, Jesse, and Jenny, thank you for being here. We're going to end, and I just really appreciate your participation and your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donna, for giving us the platform on all sides, and I really appreciate everybody coming here and learning a little bit more and anything we can do to help move this discussion forward.
My pleasure. All right. Thanks, y'all.
Hey, Donna, I have a question. Somebody's asking about 110, and we can certainly let the presenters go. I will stay here in the room till everybody else leaves, but if you and I wanted to, some people wanted to talk kind of after class, we can maybe address that question.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Donna, if you get any late questions, feel free to email me them, and I can email you back answers, and then you can send it to your group.
Thank you, Jesse. I will.
All right. Well, have a wonderful Labor Day weekend, everybody.
All right.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah, if anybody wants to talk, just chime on in. Don't be shy.
I'm curious, to somebody want to start off on 110, where that was going?
Yes, yes.
Was there anybody on the call that's knowledgeable about 110?
Kazzrie, are you knowledgeable or have any information on 110?
I know the basic that it's drug treatment therapy for folks. A lot of the money comes from the marijuana tax, but not all of it. And the other piece is that small amounts of, quote, everything of all drugs are decriminalized, so that when someone is in medical crisis and needs an ambulance, that people will be more willing to call the ambulance, because if the police come with the ambulance and you have, a small amount of drugs that you're using, it's a fine. And then you also have the option, even before, if instead of paying the fine, you can get evaluated by a drug counselor and potentially get therapy.
Yeah, and Jason just put in the chat, a no vote opposes reclassifying personal non-commercial possession of a controlled substance from a Class A misdemeanor to a Class E violation, thereby maintaining the existing maximum penalty for a Class A misdemeanor of 1 year in prison and a $6,250 fine. And then I just put a link into Ballotpedia for Measure 110 that kind of breaks it down too.
Yeah, Ballotpedia is a real nice, completely objective, nonpartisan, just the facts, ma'am.
Absolutely.
It was my question. This is Deb. I was trying to understand it and reading through a little earlier today about both measures, and just kind of thinking through it here with y'all. It's my understanding that if 109 goes through, whatever the vote is on 110 would not affect 109, and vice versa.
They allegedly complement each other.
Allegedly complement.
But you're correct in that they're absolutely two different measures, and one could pass and one could fail, and they stand alone. They are related.
Excellent. So yeah, they're both separate. One could pass and the other could not pass, and that could go any which way. But allegedly, early, in the last wave of the process, what was called 34 dropped some of what they were doing, because what was called 44 was going to be doing just that. So they felt like they were two separate things, and they weren't a split. It was more like, oh, this other group's kind of doing it, so we will just more hone in on what we're doing and allow them to do it, and they complement each other well. However, the 110 only allows for 12 grams of psilocybin measuring content of any kind, including your mycelium, including your microdosing water that you may have just 1 gram spread out into now 10 grams of material, and now you are bordering on problematic again. And for LSD, the same way. We encourage people to take like 1 dose of LSD and break it down into 20 or even 40 parts. And if you do that now, if you break it into 40 parts and your parts get measured, you are outside the boundaries of this rule, because it only requires up to 40 units of what's considered measurable. The way that it's just kind of written, this is all always still flexible, but in terms of we are the Psychedelic Society, this is where we get to use our voice and say, like, these are some things that we would like in there. Maybe if I grow a box of mushrooms, that is going to give me 28 grams by default, and that 12 wet grams isn't enough. And different stuff. So I know that psychedelics are specifically addressed in 110, LSD specifically, and psilocybin containing materials specifically, and that it wouldn't be enough for, the 109 would have to pass for psychedelic therapy to be a thing, because no psychedelic therapist would have enough mycelium to grow the contents needed to treat their patients with the current limitations on just 110.
And since you seem to know the details, I'm curious, how are they measuring the LSD limit? Is that also by weight?
It's something like they're going to take a measurable what is considered a measurable dose times 40 for LSD. So if they say 100 micrograms of LSD is a measurable dose, and you have 1 ounce of water, then how many micrograms of material do you have that would measure positive for LSD? quite a few, way more than 40. If you had a droplet of water, you might have more than 40. So that's what it says about LSD. I'll pull it out of the thing. We had a great talk about it at the healthcare professionals meeting last couple weeks ago.
Jason, maybe you could comment on this. It's my impression that if only 109 passes, it won't be legal to be in possession of any of these substances without being connected to a professional, having a professional relationship with somebody, guiding somebody through.
Well, you wouldn't be in possession of it because it would be administered.
Exactly. I mean, I want to be in possession of it.
Gotcha. But it doesn't stop other litigation from passing that allows so it doesn't stop any litigation that allows us to further legalize any other kinds of drugs that are illegal.
I'm really glad that there's something that will work for veterans. It sounds like they're already doing some therapy, but without it. It's like extra legal when they're using it.
It'll actually not only help veterans, it'll help us. It's like the general public is probably just as traumatized in a different way, but they are doing it by legal means, so the only thing he can legally do now is send veterans to ayahuasca retreats. So if MDMA gets legal, if it passes legalization to use in a clinical way in a clinical facility or whatever they decide how they're going to use it, then they'll have access to that. Ketamine's already legal, and psilocybin here would be huge for all of us, the public, the veterans. It would just,
Hey, Donna, but
eventually it's not going to happen. It's going to take 2 years for them to sort out all the details.
But still, Measure 109 requires a professional to be involved.
That's correct.
That yes, correct.
And Measure 110 takes away the penalty of prison because you have the option to pay the $100 fine or go through an evaluation.
Once you're practicing professionally that way, that's a whole different ball game.
No, 110, Jason.
Yeah, 110. Like 110 would be like, oh, I got picked up in the meadow and they caught me with 8 grams of mushrooms in my pocket. That would be what you would be covered in under 110. Now, if you had a box of mushrooms and you were taking patients into your house and giving them these mushrooms and taking money for it, that will not be covered under 110 whatsoever. What you need to be kind of covered under would be decriminalized nature.
I gotcha.
And the OHA has to also, they have up to 2 years, has to also decide on how these medicines are given, right? Because it may not be that you have to be a therapist. They're going to make the rules surrounding the administration of psilocybin. So you may be under the umbrella of a therapist, but you may be some other kind of psychedelic guide that may be able to practice under a therapist's umbrella, but it'll be vetted and figured out by the OHA. They're going to make the rules if 109 passes.
I think if 110 passes, it will be very easy for sitters to operate simply by not possessing it and tell people, bring your own sacrament.
Absolutely.
So about 109, Sam Chapman made it clear the other day when he did a presentation just on that even if that passes, the therapy is legal, but technically the psilocybin is not. He said it's not likely anybody's going to do anything, but that definitely stuck with me just, because I was wondering about that. So technically psilocybin won't be legal. Did anybody else hear anything different? Did I misunderstand that from Sam?
It's not going to be legal for the general public, but it will be.
That's not what Sam said. That's not what Sam said.
Are you referring to
it will not be it will not be legal for the general public, but it will be legal for the therapists to use it.
That's not my understanding.
Yeah, so it's like what Jason just put in the box is what the federal government always does. It'll still be federally.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead, Sari. What were you going to say?
Okay.
I was just going to touch on that, the difference between legalizing something on a state level and with specific ramification or container that it's in with, it's a lot like when medical marijuana was first legalized, and what that process was like. It still federally was illegal. That means possession and for the public wasn't accessible. And so it'll be the same thing federally. You won't be allowed to. So it was just more adding to that. And it's a great movement too, because then we can do the next step. If anything, I believe that it's a great momentum, and what happened for weed is a great model to really kind of look at to what worked, what didn't work, and what could we do better, because this should happen.
Yeah, I think what he was trying to just clarify is, like you're saying, even on a federal level, cannabis is still illegal. And so there is always the potential that the feds would pull rank. I mean, I don't think any of us expect that to happen, but yeah.
I think considering the tax yield and contribution that legalizing weed has done to states, it's not something that they're going to chase people down for. That's a big contribution in our government's pocket that goes to a lot of great things, and hopefully maybe even this.
On to that and how that connects to 110, Donna briefly mentioned that the funding of 110, providing for all of these drug recovery programs, will be taken from marijuana tax. That money is already directed to education programs in the area and in the state. So it isn't necessarily like taking money from them, but it kind of is, because that's where it's going now. So it's like, it is still the marijuana revenue, and we get to decide how it gets cut up. But some people think, taking anything away from education would be a mistake. And so there's probably some red people in the state. It's going to be really hard to convince statewide on these programs.
And Jason, I think that's a great point. And there's also the opportunity to look at, robbing Peter to pay Paul, in the sense of, if we get this to be legalized in the aspect that, would be for more legalization, even outside this measure, there's revenue to be earned on top of that. There's businesses, there's licenses, there's professionals that are now able to practice with the freedom of existing within our society. And there's so many just great ways that we can really see the money is going to get redistributed in the right places, because we're going to have the right conversations to get that done. So I do see taking a loan out of something that exists to show us the way might be a great idea. That's just my personal senses on it.
Thanks, Sari. That was great.
So yeah, on that, Sari, I agree too. And with all the current revolution we're living in, on how are we going to change all these laws? How are we going to restart thinking our criminal justice system? This already had the momentum behind it pre all of that energy. So now, they're kind of framing themselves as an attack on the war on drugs and dismantling it and rethinking how we're going to spread our resources, how criminal justice is going to work. This all kind of ties into that. So that's why I would love to get, Anthony Johnson or someone from the team on here to just answer our questions, because a lot of my imagination is built off of all of our ideas of talking about it. And I want to know what's really happening, like we learned from Sam. A lot of stuff is undecided. We're going to find out over the next 2 years who gets to decide who gets to administer the therapy. The stuff they're telling us is a minimum guideline that is to be built upon by the OHA. And when we talk about that, we talk about MAPS. The people I talk to with MAPS are saying what the government wants is that in a MAPS thing, one of the deal is you get a male therapist, you get a female therapist. No matter who you are, you get both. They both sit with you. They'll hold your hands if you want to, okay? The government wants both of those people to be PhD doctors. And they're going, maybe one of them could be a doctor and the other one really doesn't matter if we have a doctor in the room, if the other person is educated and has passed some, can it be a master's? And the government's like, no, has to be 2 doctors holding the hand. And it's like, so that's where they're at with how much control they want and grip of who gets to do this. So this fantasy of, oh, well, it says in here, anybody with harm reduction skills, I attended a certificate and I have it in that, so I can be one of these. That is not going to be what happens in 2 years. You know, we're going to find out come 2 years who gets to do it.
Maybe other than I have a lot of faith that maybe in Portland or in Oregon, where it's a little more progressive, if there would have to be 2 people, which of course doubles part of the price right there, one could be some sort of counselor, but I would think that we would say, and the other one has to be a shaman. Right? I mean, 2 doctors is ridiculous.
Absolutely. It's not sustainable at all. And that's why the MAPS protocol right now bills out at $200 an hour. Who the hell can afford that? You know, and that's why the underground psychedelic therapists and guides are going to still flourish even after all of these things are legalized. Because again, who's going to be able to afford it? Rich white people or people with money. It's like, how is that going to sustain the traumatized non-white communities that need to access these medicines too?
Well, Donna, I think that's an amazing point. I mentioned on the other call the other night for healthcare professional when we were going over the measures, is, the aspect of a question that I couldn't get an answer to, right? We'll pull one out of the bucket, but this one's like, looking at how education is really rolled out. We already know we need reform on curriculum, and the way that our setup and what people are paying for is ridiculous, and we are not evolving academically, and this is well known. But regardless to that, we're excluding indigenous healthcare study, our own ancient healthcare studies from our medical programs. And to be a shaman or to have indigenous rights to be teaching those classes, that's huge. And there's another big problem to solve, but it's a question to ask, and we need to have more involvement with our POC and our indigenous community with these conversations, because I do feel like they should have a say. It's a give and take when it comes to learning something that's already existed prior to us. We're all coming to this now, and there are people that have been doing this for thousands of years, and that's a way to honor that reality, and the reality that it should be free to all people because it is medicine.
Yeah, and that'll really show you people that put their money where their mouth is when it comes to giving care to people. How much are you going to charge? Are you going to include people of color? Is there going to be a sliding scale? How ethical are you going to be? And I know that the OHA is going to allow for clinics to do that, and then we'll really be able to see where people are at with this, that are giving this consciousness medicine. This should be interesting.
And still, I'm probably a little Pollyanna about it, but I'm excited that there's something happening. And even if it rolls out and in Jason's worst nightmare is expensive and is overly controlled and on and on and on, it is still true that it's going to be happening more. And there must be people out there that are not going to be doing it, coloring inside those lines. And if they're comfortable doing that, then the psychedelic renaissance is still moving forward.
Absolutely, Kazzrie. And also more of those compounds are going to be available and easier for all of us to get. Even if they just become legal within clinical people or, whoever can have them, whenever that happens, is they're just more readily available in society. So I'm excited too.
I agree. I'm excited also, Kazzrie. I think that even sometimes when we look at one answer, it's not always the exact solution. Like, everything is something that can be looked at from so many different facets. And, it's hard not to be creative when we get an answer that we feel like isn't broad enough. And, that's where the optimism comes in, is knowing what we're capable of, even getting this far, to be where we're at right now is significant. So Thanks for adding that positivity, but it's a good reminder.
I think 110 is great. A few things came up for me when I was listening to the presentation. One, when Jesse was talking, you know, he seemed to have joined the army and gone to the war in Afghanistan, and something that was natural to him. He apparently supported the war. Now, I don't know that much about the politics, but I know there's a lot of people that think, you know, that wouldn't have done that. They didn't think that the cause was something they supported. It was something they wanted to do or support. But it goes to the bigger question, I think, that I know governments have studied psychedelics as a truth serum or as something that makes people more gullible to suggestion. So I wonder, as psychedelics are legalized, I wonder what protections can be put in place to make sure they're not used in that way to make people more susceptible to propaganda.
Well, since no one's else jumping in, I'll jump in and say I would argue that psychedelics don't make you more susceptible. They make you more more aware of what's really going on. And something like, I don't know, I think alcohol would be more likely to get you in a place where somebody could take advantage of you.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you can definitely be susceptible. I think you can be very easily led too, because, you know, just like such a hard way for me, I like conceptualize something and then it becomes hard to communicate the point. But the idea is that we are so full of meaning, like after it happens, and we're just like in that point, like everything in life is good. So if some like slick slicer is like, yeah, come this way, it's good. You're like, yeah, it is good, you know, because like everything is good. You might also, if it's like a slick kind of thing, you might also be way more in tune that something bad might be happening. But there's also just that phase of like that good week where you're open to pretty much seeing things as synchronicities that are going to like change the way that you're moving the direction of your days and your life. And so I definitely think, I mean, maybe not for advanced users, but at least for like people hitting it for the first time and then like thinking that all that meaning is that next day and that they're not sensing yet that that's like them, or you know what I mean, that it can make you very much more susceptible. I don't know to propaganda, but to whatever life serves in that time period.
I think that's good feedback, Jason and Kazzrie. I think that you know, my take on just that what you said, John, in a sense with what Kazzrie said is, you know, there's going to be negative setbacks to anything. To every law that we have, there are negative setbacks to something or possibly something. Even alcohol, we know that there's negative setbacks. We know that people die from alcohol. We know that people die from cigarettes. We know that people have bad experiences when they go to frat parties. We still allow those to happen. There's so many different variances that we allow to happen legally. Why psychedelics when we know there's actually a solution behind psychedelics? We know that it causes healing. We know that it causes connectivity. We know that it causes awareness. We know that it causes all these beautiful things that we've been talking about, but the other options don't, and they're legal. So it's sometimes when we look at what is the roadblock of, wow, what are we worried about, the negative things that could be said, those are irrelevant with where our laws are already put in place that things are okay that we know have negative side effects. So when we overcome those objections, I feel like that's kind of an easy one. It's a no-brainer one. We just need to get more people involved and educated like we're doing, so that when people go to vote, we can vote responsibly. We can vote with education, vote with peer understanding, vote with testimony from all these people that share. So I think propaganda only works when you don't inform yourself. And that's just kind of my take on it.
Word. And alcohol and tobacco are the two most dangerous drugs on the scale of that societally. Personally, I mean, between the money spent, it's alcohol is the number one most dangerous drug, and entheogens are like in the bottom 3 of the spectrum of most dangerous. I'm going to try to find that graph.
So Donna, an interesting kind of like thing to think about in that too is alcohol is also legal and easily accessible, and the number one way that people cope with their trauma when they don't have access to treatment. That's a problem.
Yeah, I would say the main thing against creating the system that serves the psilocybin is creating a system that serves psilocybin, not because it isn't a healing substance, but because, like, why would you say, yeah, this one is the one that heals, so it should be used for this type of person, and we're going to do it that way? It's like the thing that's magical about the way that it heals is it's literally growing all around us as we step. And to say, like, the way to heal is to not just like pick it up and eat it, but to like be restricted to who's allowed to grow it, who's allowed to facilitate it, how this has to be done at such a high expense that it is going to require now insurance bureaucracies and hundreds of dollars for trained professionals to keep what's from the earth beneath our feet from our mouths by this system of legally doing that. And so that's where just like my main like issue with it isn't that like I don't support people doing mushrooms, and that I don't think it is that it isn't even that I don't imagine that in decriminalization that model could be like awesome or like, but the fact that it like doesn't address that, where it's just like, oh no, we found some slick way to bring this to people, but it's in like a very elite system, you know, or whatever. They even say that. They're like, we're trying to appeal to the elites. We're giving them chairs on our boards. We are doing this. And it's like, to me, like archetypically, it just seems like absolutely like, oh, I've been down this road before. Like, I know how this goes. But on the other hand, as Sarah, you opened this, cannabis has been absolutely. Whoops.
No.
My Zoom froze. I was just on a long ass rant. I was just saying, as Sari said, medical marijuana and then turned into what we have today is outstanding and awesome. So if you guys heard that.
We did.
Now, some people on the Facebook group were against this measure. I mean, I think it's great. I think it's a good first step that can probably be improved on. But some people on the Facebook measure said they would not vote for it, and the Facebook group said they would not vote for it. I don't remember what their reasons were, or not sure I got them straight. Does anyone know?
It was about that rant I went on last time about the only thing is about creating a system itself, and that you know, it restricts access to many by making the system. And so that's why people are against it. That's the main reason I've heard, is it seems like the dead obvious thing to do would not to create a comprehensive system led by geniuses, but to just say, eat it, and then the world will all heal. And it's like much simpler and to the, you know, but people want to do it this way too. I get it. It's like, at least it's something. When you feel like you can't just change the world that easily, you know, it's like, at least we can move it a little bit. I get that argument too, but I don't vote, so I'm happy. So I don't have to make a decision on this one.
Well, I'm so very super disappointed to hear that you don't vote. I always try to encourage people, like, really not just for Sarah Iannarone, really not just for whatever, because you can choose to not vote for all kinds of different categories. But I would hope that you would like Sarah over Ted Wheeler. But I guess now we're devolving into
exactly. I don't even know nothing about neither of them, and I don't want to. Like, I don't want that in my head at all.
Okay, well, I got to respect that, and it's interesting because it's sort of like you know, the two things are happening at the same time. I mean, the psychedelic renaissance includes, you know, the folks, and I'm a lot more like you, Jason, than like the other folks, and yet I really am excited for them to also be doing that at the same time, because when we're able to deconstruct the whole system and like not elect the Joe Biden, but elect somebody that actually understands that the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies and the medical system is the problem. So I understand engaging with it and trying to make it do what you want is like, no, let's throw that out the window and do something that makes sense. But in the meanwhile, we're going to do this other thing too.
Right. It's like, I get it, but why don't just say everybody can eat them, but people who are really scared and want to do it formally, you can, and it'll cost you $5,000, and you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but you have to make a down payment or whatever. You know, I'm all for it, but to just like not do it the easiest way and create something.
I totally have like the same reservations on like the way things get manipulated, and you have to play the game in order to make any like movement and stuff that seems like, you know, kind of like you're trying to negotiate with people that, you know, they might be geniuses, but they don't have experience, or they might have an understanding how to monopolize what we're trying to do because they're capitalists, you know, and that's the way that things work. And unfortunately, like I think it's a huge frustration. Definitely. I could probably talk about that a lot. I think the way that our medical system needs to be looked at, just like the educational system, which makes it hard to vote when you have all these broken systems and you're like, okay, vote. So I get where you're coming from on that one too. I don't know how to better, like, what would be the answer to that other than like your answer, but like, would that be coming up with a new like proposed like measure for the ballot? What would be the solution to having something that works better?
So I guess, you know, that's what our September 14th meeting will be with the decriminalized people, because I will tell you, you know, it sounds, you know, my bias is pretty clear now. I found that I kind of align with a lot of what they're doing, but then also where my mind slipped so quickly was where they really disinterest me is they are dealing with politicians at the city level, not like that is their game. So basically what their game plan is, okay, so I'll just spoil it in one sentence. This is what we'd be putting on our event calendar anyway. And that is, these guys they were forming integration circles early on, tripping, doing private integration circles together. And and out of that, they decided, what are we going to implement? How are we going to change this? And they started the decriminalized nature thing, and they found a successful method. And their successful method is they basically go to the people running for mayor and go, you know, not mayor actually, they go to the city council members, but I don't know any of them. So let's just say Sarah and Ted, because those names came up. They go, Ted, what is your stance on psychedelics? Do you think that people who use cactuses or plants, do you support them for their healing, or people use mushrooms or ayahuasca? And they ask that of all the people who are coming up for city council, who are on the city council. And then what happens next is the media picks up on the council members' response, whatever it is, yes or no. Then the media goes, Sarah doesn't support psychedelics. And that is what people start to hear. And then Sarah becomes mayor, and that like little lingering thing about the psychedelics is still there. And somebody who's a big alma mater or whatever, big persuader in the arena in Portland goes, you know, I'm for this, you know, starts putting pressure on them, saying like, I saw you were against ayahuasca. I really think you should rethink that. I'm Dr. Bronner's, or I'm whomever. And so what they're finding is, even if it doesn't pass or they don't get anywhere the first year, the media keeps covering it as these politicians keep going through their cycles, and it keeps drawing attention back to the cities and the people who are from those cities, and then it's changing things later. So they're getting support later through like this free media, and it costs them like nothing basically, but their time to. And so since it's so low weight, they're helping other cities all over do this. And so what they do is they get the council members basically to pass some sort of mandate or resolution or something. We're all seeing it in the media where it's like, Seattle just voted to defund the police. And we're like, what? How does that happen? We never have a vote. But you find out there's like a city council that makes decisions, and they get to write certain things in. And so what they're doing is getting those people to write in something that says any plant medicine, and they use like entheogen, that they use entheogen in the hard, this does not cover LSD, it is only for plants, ayahuasca, DMT, shrooms, cactus, etc. are all covered. And it basically says these can be used as a medicine or a holy sacrament, and anyone can do them, and it's decriminalized. You're not allowed to send police after them. You're not allowed to use any court resources to go after them in any way for doing this. And what we saw as a result of that is that happened in a couple cities. Oakland, happened in Santa something.
Denver, maybe?
Denver passed something, but that was not them. That was a separate group. They did it. Denver passed through like the legislative panel way. But a few people have done this the get through the city way. And what we saw in this recent church bust was they busted them and they seized pounds and pounds of dried shrooms, and they did not charge them for any of it because Oakland has that thing in there. At this point, it doesn't seem like it was even worth it for them to charge there. They just went after the you're an illegal cannabis dispensary, because that has a regulatory framework, right? Now they can say this is how you serve marijuana. So when you bust somebody with shrooms now, it's like, hey, you're doing this. There's a way to do this. If you want to be a grower in this state, you need to register with us. We have only 10 licenses available because that's all it takes to serve a lifetime supply ever for the whole ever. So it can get real ugly when you start saying like, there are ways we do this and this is how it's done.
Let me ask you this, Jason. Do you think it should be legal for someone to grow mushrooms or pick them wild and give them to someone who may not have much understanding of what they do and maybe takes a large dose and has a bad experience?
Do I think it should be legal to give somebody enough mushrooms to have a bad experience, like without giving them like the proper harm reduction techniques and stuff?
Something like that, yeah.
I don't think that should be illegal.
Yeah, there's two adults there. You know,
what if I gave somebody like a 5-pound bag of sugar and they went home and ate the whole thing?
Yeah.
Well,
we'd put you in prison. That's what would happen.
Yeah, right. Hey, that's a ticket, man. You should have known that guy wasn't smart enough, or he wouldn't have figured out what to do with the stuff. I mean, I would be in prison because my friends, every time I try to hook them up with something, they do something, come back with some crazy story that I would lock myself up for if we're holding ourselves to that standard.
Well, I mean, you know, you have the mushrooms that you've grown, and you have a party at your house, and somebody comes over that you don't know.
Yeah.
And you say, I mean, I guess
I would hope that would be legal.
Responsible for his own decisions and the consequences of them, but.
I would hope that would be legal, because how else are we going to make that exchange socially?
Yeah, Darwin.
Like if you come to my birthday party and we're all hanging out and I realize, oh, this is all the same people I've known for a year, it's probably okay now that we're all, you know, together and feeling comfortable that I can give you a handful of something.
Well,
and if you're making that illegal,
somebody could be giving them away on the street to people they don't know.
Well, that's the other thing. So at the Detroit Psychedelic Conference, during some of the talks, people would pull out like bags of mushrooms and just pass them around and say, take as many as you want.
I love it.
I might agree. I'll have to think about it.
Yeah, it's I get what you're saying too, that there's like, we have to have something there to like, so that people aren't just like, the same thing with the salvia. They were selling like 100x extract at the place people go to get a little marijuana high with like ditch weed, and then they fucking sell them 100x salvia and they go home and zonk themselves out and talk about seeing millions of clowns and their whatever, you know.
John, I think that everyone has personal responsibility to know what they put in their body. No one's being forced to do anything. And, you know, if you're getting these resources from your friends or people that you know, like, ask them about what you're doing before you do it. It seems to be a common sense factor, but it can't be something that everyone's held accountable for everyone else's understanding of what they do to themselves. That would be a ridiculous ramifications and like tickets and claims and crap and bullshit. So, you know, like everyone's got to own their shit. Everyone's got to know what they're putting in their body. You know, everybody has that consent factor of like, no one's going to be pushed on it, you know, in that peer pressure way that there might happen. Of course, it still happens with alcohol and weed and shit, but like you choose what you put into your system. And if you don't know, then you gotta figure out what that means. Like what are you putting in?
It could be a circumstance where someone says to someone else, eat these mushrooms, they're good for your arthritis or something. And the person doesn't even know they're going to have a psychoactive effect.
Yeah, I think that it would be handled just like everything else in the world on that matter, like where a lot of homeopath issues like this come up all the time, where people are suggested to take essential oils and drink them. And if depending on where you get your essential oil, that's not going to be the smartest idea. There's different spectrums of how people resource that stuff, and it can be hazardous. So again, that's going to be, you know, depending on what happens to that person and the legal system that they're around and what action that person takes, it's on them. You know, it's for everybody to be responsible. If you're suggesting stuff outside of your knowledge and know-how, be responsible for you. You know, like if you told somebody to do something that you shouldn't have told them to do and they end up getting hurt and you end up getting a phone call and you've got to be responsible for that decision, be responsible for that decision and pay whatever due that is that's going to have to happen. Like we're all adults and we don't have to babysit every human on every law and decision. There's common sense and awareness around what we do in a regular basis, just leaving our house and going to the grocery store. Like we interact with people all day long. We know right from wrong. And that's, our laws don't need to babysit us.
Yep. Yeah, the government isn't mommy and daddy. They're our employees. And it's like that's the problem, is people are always looking to government and others to be responsible for what we should be responsible. And there's just too much litigation, too much law. You know, when did we take the intelligence out of our own decisions and ask the government to litigate it for us? What can we do? You know, we're grown-ups. Unless it's a corruptible person or somebody that doesn't know any better and they're force-fed, there's a case. But if you're a grown person and you can make a conscious decision, you're A&O times 4, then it's up to you, you know, to decide whether to put it in your mouth.
Maybe it should be handled the same way as we have laws against deceptive advertising. If there's deceit involved in giving to someone, maybe that should be illegal, as opposed to simply sharing without deceit.
I'm sure something like that's going to be written in. You know, like the laws, when they birth, it's a process and a labor of going through all of the details and information and figuring out what's appropriate to put in and what's not appropriate to put in, what's vague and what's not, what's detailed. And hopefully when we do get there and when there are those committees assembling and we are having what Jason said, you know, where people are actually making those, you know, affirmative actions in the sense of like getting that movement, that we're thinking about that. You know, I say that in a sense of like, I'm going to be involved. I would like to help this birthing process of creating like a freer sense of self-management, self-healthcare, self-deciding on what I put in my body, what I don't, self-educating in what ways I want to and otherwise, you know, all of it. So I think that it's what we choose to worry about, big or small, are all things that can be resolved. In this matter anyways. I don't know about your personal lives. I can't handle everything. This call's too short.
Let me ask John one more question, then I'll leave. Okay, so one of the like dream ideas of people behind PPS is that if certain legislation changes were made, they would be able to give out mushrooms in the park, and with a little handbook basically that would describe things inside about set and setting. And that would have basic principles of psychedelic harm reduction about sitting and sitting, not guiding. Difficult is not bad. Resources to Zendo. Different just tips in there. And in theory, on the back here, this would be a spore print that you could go home and scrape off and grow mushrooms with. And you know, in a perfect legalized climate, a dream would be to be able to give people, you know, a dose of mushrooms or a bag of microdoses to get them through a month or whatever, you know, something like that would be something that people would be willing to completely give away for free. So like that goes into your question, you know, so that's why I wanted to bring it up.
I'm not sure that should be illegal, but I think if done, you know, if you're actually giving away mushrooms to people who had no exposure to it before, I think a lot of people would end up hurting themselves. Maybe the spores to grow them, but I'm not sure it would be. I myself personally would not want to give something away like that without knowing anything about the person.
Right. Yeah. Stamets said, right. He said, do you want to be responsible for other people's bad trips? All right. Well, that's all I got then. I see you guys soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Donna, for having you know, this today, and I loved hearing the speakers, and I really found a connection with the message, and I'm hoping that, you know, all positive things and all great momentums are fueled by those who really believe in it. So I think it's pretty cool way to end my Sunday.
Oh, thank you. Thanks you guys for coming. I really appreciate it.
Nice. Bye, everybody.